Hey guys, this is Tommy Dimsdale. I'm a regional director for the National Association for Gun Rights, and welcome back to our Foundations of Freedom series, where we explore history and sift through all the revisionist garbage to bring you the truth. Don't forget to help us spread this truth by leaving a like and comment down below, and also hitting that red subscribe button and turning on notifications so you can keep up with everything the National Association for Gun Rights is doing for your freedom all across the country. Today we're asking the question, who are the militia? For decades, leftist gun control advocates have used this clause in the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia, to argue the idea that not only does the militia no longer exist in today's society, but even when it did, the founders wanted it to be well-regulated by government authorities. A quote commonly attributed to Dianne Feinstein echoes the misinformation doled out by gun control advocates across the country. They say that the National Guard fulfills the militia mentioned in the Second Amendment, and that citizens no longer need to protect the states or themselves. Well, with the mostly peaceful protest and rampant division popping up all over the country, we can see that there is more need than ever to stay strapped or get clapped. Sadly, if we Google who are the militia, we get bombarded by images and articles of extremist movements painting freedom-loving Americans as insurrectionists and terrorists. When we come to understand that the militia consists of the whole of the people, average, everyday Joes who want to protect their liberties, communities, and families, it makes sense that the political and media elites would brand patriotic Americans as violent terrorists to be maligned, mischaracterized, and generally slandered. It's time to set the record straight on who the militia really are, average, normal, everyday people, including you and I. So, the Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We'll note that both the First and the Fourth Amendments share similar language. The right of the people is present in both of these amendments and does not exclude anyone from those freedoms. The people means just that, the people. The Second Amendment likewise isn't granting a right to the militia. It's not granting a right to a free state. It's recognizing that right to the people at large. The part many get confused about is what we call a justification clause. This is the clause we see at the beginning of the amendment, and the reason the founders decided to add in language regarding the militia was to highlight exactly why this amendment was needed. It wasn't for hunting. It wasn't for sport shooting. It wasn't even for self-protection, even though our gun rights do lend to those reasons from time to time. The number one concern as to why people had a right to arm themselves was a defense against a tyrannical government. The founders felt so strongly in this that even when writing the ever-important First and Fourth Amendments, they did not include a justification clause. The Second Amendment was unique in that the founders not only wanted us to know that we had a right to bear arms, but they were compelled to address exactly why it was important, a guard against runaway tyrannical government. The 2008 DC versus Heller case confirmed that gun ownership was an individual right as the founders intended when referencing the militia. Now, many liberals will now say that the Second Amendment was reinvented in this case, all as a conspiracy to push the new conservative agenda. Well, for something to be reinvented, that means it would have to change. But instead of relying on the words of 9 unelected judges in Washington, D.C., let's look at the original sources from the Founding Fathers and what was actually intended. Of course, modern-day leftists want to stay away from original sources as much as possible and instead rely on these peer-reviewed thesis papers from totally non-biased college professors, right? So who is the militia? The Militia Act of 1792 defined the militia as all white males 18 to 45. Of course, today that freedom is extended to women and people of all races, as the idea that all men are created equal ultimately triumphed, and we can find multiple references from notable founding fathers referring to the militia as the whole of the people. Considering you'd be lucky to make it to your mid-30s or 40s back in the late 1700s, we can logically expand those rights to people who are older than 45. We can look to James Madison's Federalist Papers number 49, where he gave clues as to the identity of the militia when he described the phrase militia amounting to near 500,000 of citizens with arms in their hands. This 500,000 number is reference to the rough estimate of able-bodied men in the country at that time. Simple logic would say he is referring to all able-bodied men. However, we need a more concrete answer to confirm that this is exactly what the founders meant. Here we introduce Tench Cox. Now, Cox was a renowned businessman, a member of the Confederate Congress under the Articles of Confederation, mind you, Pennsylvanian, and our nation's first Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. It's fair to say that this guy was not just publicly known, but he was significantly involved in the building of the government of the new nation. In 1787 and 88, he wrote extensively to urge the public to get behind and ratify the Constitution. He said, "The power of the sword, say the minority of Pennsylvania, is in the hands of Congress. My friends and countrymen, it is not so, for the powers of the sword are in the hands of the yeomanry of America from 16 to 60. The militia of these free commonwealths, entitled and accustomed to their arms when compared to any possible army, must be tremendous and irresistible. Who are the militia? Are they not ourselves? Is it feared then that we shall turn our arms against each man against his own bosom? Congress have no power to disarm the militia. Their swords and every other terrible implement of the soldier are in the birthright of an American. What clause in the state or federal constitution hath given away that important right? The unlimited power of the sword is not in the hands of either the federal or state governments, but where I trust in God, it will ever remain in the hands of the people." Founding Father George Mason played an enormous role in crafting and ratification of the Constitution. In open debates, he said, "I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people except a few public officers." Obviously, the founders' number one concern of out-of-control government was remedied by the idea of the militia. And what better protection could there be than by declaring the whole of the people to serve that duty? We have to remember that the idea of the militia was very prevalent in the late 1700s as communities took care of their own problems. Simply dialing 911 wasn't an option, so the able-bodied men of those communities routinely took charge of the protection of their homesteads and the surrounding areas. Wife beating? The militia showed up. Thievery? The militia stood guard. Fire? The militia was there to help put it out and help rebuild. Now keep in mind that in most cases, none of these men were ever assigned a rank, enlisted into a service, or reported to a higher authority. Individual responsibility drove them to their task and the safety of their towns, thereby fulfilling the role of a well-regulated militia. Many opponents of the Second Amendment who spent 7 years in high school will argue that because the phrase well-regulated means, strict oversight in today's language, that we should have across-the-board gun registration. However, once again, we must go to the original sources, and the language of those original sources can vary based on the phrases used back then. Well-regulated had nothing to do with government oversight at all, but instead, the idea of something being well-regulated meant it was a well-oiled machine, that all able-bodied men ought to be able to react to threats on a moment's notice, be familiar with the workings of a rifle, and be competent in addressing or disposing of those threats. Letters from a federal farmer, number 18, Herbert Storing, said, "Whereas to preserve liberty, it is essential that the whole body of the people always possess arms and be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. Nor does it follow from this that all promiscuously must go into actual service on every occasion. The mind that aims at a select militia, meaning anyone who wants militias to be organized or have government oversight, must be influenced by a truly anti-republican principle. And when we see many men disposed to practice upon it whenever they can prevail, no wonder true Republicans are for carefully guarding against it." So, there we have it. And I hope this clears things up the next time Uncle Bob sits down at the Thanksgiving table and wants to know why you need an AR-15 to go hunting. It's not for hunting deer, Bob. It's for hunting tyrants. Thank you, and God bless.